Welcome to Around the Table, the talk show podcast of Curtain Call FM.
Yeah, that's right. You're listening to Around the Table here on Curtain Call FM. This is our podcast. I'd like to say hello to Alistair Woodgate, whose table we're sitting around, Julie Roofy and myself, Mark Bilsby. Hello, welcome to our podcast.
Hello.
So, what's been happening this time on our podcast?
Well, I think we've been to see some shows during the last week, and there's lots coming up on the local circuit.
Yeah.
So we ought to preview some of the shows coming up. But Mark, you've been to see a show in London that I was very fortunate to be able to see in Broadway last year, which has just opened over here, which is already in probably my top 5 musicals of all time. So really interested to hear what you think about that. And Julia, you've been to see a new play at Milton Keynes Theatre.
Yes, I have indeed. I went to Milton Keynes on Monday and I saw Trial by Laughter.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't know it, absolutely.
No, it's new. It started at the Watermill last year and it's been on tour. It's by Ian Hislop and Nick Newmans.
Ian Hislop of Private Eye.
Private Eye, yeah.
So with that pedigree, I guess it's sort of acerbic wit and dry satire, humour, and really quite funny?
No.
Okay.
No. It was mildly amusing. It was a smile and a chuckle. But it was historical because it's a play about William Hone.
Okay, William
Deathly
Hone.
Silence over the country,
yes.
yeah. William Hone, nobody's ever heard of him. But he's actually pretty much the godfather of free speech, really. He was a satirical pamphlet writer in the 1817, in fact, where the play is set.
Okay, so given that Ian Hislop wrote it and involved in Private Eye, was William Hone sort of the Private Eye writer of his time?
He was really, yes. He and George Cruikshank, the cartoonist, they wrote these satirical pamphlets, and nothing and no one was sacred. They were absolutely vicious to the Prince Regent, for example, who was
rather large, wasn't he?
Big fat man, chased a lot of women. In fact, he was dubbed as the worst king of England ever. So he was great fodder for them. He ended up getting caught out really because he started paraphrasing and parodying the Catholic Mass, the general quotes from the Bible, and that was when the law came after him.
Yeah, certainly in the early 1800s.
Yeah, so he was done for libel, really blasphemy and sedition. On 3 consecutive days, he was arrested, convicted, tried and acquitted 3 times on 3 consecutive days, which is some kind of a record, yeah? And he was very popular, so there were riots outside the Guildhall while he was being tried, and I think that's partly why he got off 3 times, because, of course, the French Revolution had happened quite recently, so it was fairly fresh in people's minds, and so I think nobody really wanted that to happen in England. So he got off, But yeah, nothing was sacred with him, and that's basically the premise of the play.
Wow.
Yeah.
And but you say it was very much more sort of historical rather than hysterical.
It was, yes, it definitely was. There was, the man who played Hone, Joseph Prowan, he was fantastic. He was never off the stage. He did a lot of quoting of the bits in the pamphlet and things. It was a brilliant part. He was absolutely superb. In fact, actually, all the actors were superb. It was really fast-paced. The problem was it was more interesting than funny, really. And actually, they did a question and answer afterwards with Ian Hislop and Nick Newmans. Somebody actually asked him that. They said, "How do you feel about the fact that we were a very quiet audience?" And he was great about it. He said, "Well, I'll have to do better next time," sort of thing. He was great about it. He was very funny. I found it absolutely fascinating because I just love history. People who aren't so into history, maybe they wouldn't have found it quite so interesting, because I think they would have gone expecting Trial by Laughter. You think of stand-up, you think of comedy, competition, and it was none of those things at all. Yeah. But I loved it. Loved it.
Relatively small cast? Do I gather that they doubled up and played a number of characters?
In fact, tripled up in some cases.
Wow.
Some of them were actually playing 3 parts. So it was a relatively small cast, which made them even better because several of them, particularly Dan Mersch, who played 2 completely different characters, and you, apart from the fact that he had a beard, you didn't even know it was the same person.
Wow.
Really fantastic
That's
performances.
a sign of good performance,
Yes.
yeah.
So there was a small cast and they all sort of tripled up and doubled up. It's a big stage, Milton Keynes.
It is. They had a kind of a box set with lots of different doors, and every time they were in the courtroom, the judge's chair sort of came out of the back and then went back in to turn into a cupboard sort of thing, you know. Yeah, I feel that the piece probably would have worked better in a studio theatre because people would have been more in touch with it.
Yep, you can engage more with the characters.
Yes, it was.
and
I
feel
was,
as though you're there in the courtroom. Yeah,
I was quite near the front, so it didn't matter so much to me. But I feel people at the back might have felt really very distanced from it.
So you went on the press night. Was it just press, or was there members of the public there as well?
Oh no, there were loads. I mean, it was nearly full.
Right, okay.
It was nearly full, which was great for them.
Yeah.
It was very full house.
So if you was up in the wings, would you think you're still being engaged as such?
Yeah, I'm not sure you really would. And I think the other thing they didn't have enough people to create a jury when it was the courtroom scenes.
Right.
So they'd actually got recording of the voices. So somebody would come to the front and talk to the jury, and the jury would come back as recorded comments.
Right, yeah.
I'm not 100% sure that worked in such a big theatre. I think it would have worked a lot better in a smaller venue, personally. Didn't spoil my enjoyment of it, but as I say, I just loved the whole historical aspect of it.
So once it's finished its run, possibly gets released in due course, is it a show that local amateur theatre companies could consider a play that's worth considering?
I think they could. I think they could because, I mean, there's plenty of really good amateur actors around for the 2 or 3 parts.
Sounds there's some quite meaty parts to get involved in.
And in actual fact, if you wanted to, of course, you don't have to double cast anything. I mean, it's actually a very big cast of characters if you add up all the people who are playing 2 and 3 parts.
Picking up on your point about the jury, there was a production of Guys and Dolls upstairs at the Gatehouse a few years back.
Yes.
Where when they went to the mission, they used the front row of the audience as the sinners, and they put hats on them because it was a very small cast.
Yeah.
In the same way, could you, with this in a studio, actually have members of the audience effectively being the jury, and get them sort of that much more involved?
I think you could. I think you could. You couldn't in a big theatre like that because apart from anything else, they would have had trouble seeing members of the audience. But I definitely think there is a way that you could have used the audience more. There was one point where they were questioning the audience and that one of the prosecuting counsels got cross with a member of the audience, but it didn't quite work brilliantly because they were a bit detached.
Yeah.
The audience were a bit detached, you know, and so it didn't work amazingly. But yes, I mean, actually, I saw that production mainly because my son was playing Nicely Nicely in that production.
Right. And my friend Joss was in it as well,
Yes. And that worked superbly because they just put hats on people. And if you did that, it would be very good.
Again, another way of getting the audience very much engaged with the trial.
I think
itself.
It would work well. I think it would be a gift for amateurs, to be honest.
So it's just coming to the end of its run, is it?
Yeah, I think they've got one more date. It's they've been touring since they left Newbury, which with a bit of a break, which was
And the show again,
it's Trial by Laughter. Ian Hislop and Nick Newmans.
Was there more of a laughter at the QA session after? Wasn't there one?
Well, Ian Hislop is, of course, hysterical. So, yes, there were some real belly laughs coming from him. He's a great raconteur, and so he was... because he, of course, has actually been a victim of a lot of libel trials, several of which he's lost.
Yes.
So he very much could put himself in the position of William Hone.
Yeah. But so you think, though, if he's that funny, why can he portray that in... The Trial by Laughter?
Maybe that wasn't his.
Well, I think
his
no,
intended for the play.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons was there was quite a lot of quoting from the pamphlets and actual quotes, I suspect, from the trial itself. And I think there is a degree of the humour then would not be the humour now, because with anything satirical, it's of the moment, and once it's not of the moment. I mean, the best example of that is Gilbert and Sullivan's Iolanthe, where he talks about Captain Shaw, who the hell knows who Captain Shaw is now? But Captain Shaw was a first nighter who sat in the front row for every performance.
Right.
And so, but you don't know that now. And this, I think that was what was wrong with this. There was some stuff which probably was hysterical during the actual time, and now we don't understand
we've
it.
Lost it, yeah. One of the things you mentioned there, which kind of leads me on to a question for you, Mark. You talked about the cast playing multiple roles. Of course, that is a feature of the show that you went to see in the West End.
Yes, Come From Away.
Come From Away, where a very small cast, ensemble, plays a variety of characters in the story there.
They play the Islanders, they play the playing people. And thank you very much. I was corrected. I said up in the wings, and it should be up in the gods for the theatre bit.
Online, on the app, and on your smart speaker. Around the Table, the talk show podcast of Curtain Call FM.
Hello, welcome back to Around the Table with Alistair Woodgate, Julie Rufy, myself, Mark Bilsby. And before we went to the break,
we were talking about Come From Away, which has recently opened at the Phoenix Theatre in London's West End.
And
Mark,
you saw it in Broadway.
I was very lucky to see it on Broadway last year. And as I was saying a little earlier, probably in my top 5 musicals. I just absolutely loved it. Sublime piece of theatre. But Mark, what was your take on it?
Well, I've got to be honest, it was at the Phoenix Theatre, and as long as you're not massively tall, it's a rather uncomfortable theatre.
It's all right for me, I'm very short.
What's nice about it is because the show was so good, you forget about your discomfort. You get absorbed into it. It's about... well, I'm going to let you explain about it because you know about it, but this is my take on it. When I sat down, I thought, not much on the stage. A few tree trunks, bit of fake greenery. The band seemed to be interspersed amongst the trees, and what seemed to be like a load of planks of wood on the back wall, which had various doors that would open up, and that was it. And we sat down and I thought, okay, let's see what happens. And what I liked about it was the cast were of every age, from me as a 56-year-old right down to the youngsters. It was a small cast, and they played the Islanders, and they played the people in the aeroplanes.
Well, of course, it centres around the effects of, or some of the effects of 9/11. The planes that couldn't land at JFK and other airports in and around New York.
Because they closed American airspace, didn't they?
They did,
for a while.
yes. When the Twin Towers were hit, those planes had to be diverted somewhere, and they got diverted to Gander in Newfoundland. And Gander Airport used to be the airport where aeroplanes would be refuelling when they had to do the transatlantic flights before these days where they can do it all in one fell swoop.
It's a massive airport.
It's an absolutely vast airport to
but
take
they were just
the big
about
aeroplanes.
to close it, weren't they?
They were, because Gander's a relatively small community. The airport wasn't being used anymore, certainly not for those big transatlantic flights. But of course it provided the ideal space to land the planes that should have been going into New York City. So about 38 or so planes landed there, and Come From Away tells the story of how the Islanders coped, dealt with, welcomed the passengers on those planes, took them in for several days until such time as the airspace was reopened. And for the passengers, the stories that they had to tell about where they were going, the people that they were supposed to be meeting, the people they were concerned about in New York as well. And for me, what I loved about it was the fact that you had total empathy with all of the characters in the show. And it's a small ensemble, but they're all playing 3 or 4 different characters. But never once did I get confused as to who was playing who. They were so good at portraying the different characters, weren't they?
You forgot about the previous character. It's the same person, but he's changed his jacket. He's now someone completely different. Fantastic.
The other thing I loved about it was it was absolutely perfect example of less is more in theatre, that you don't need massive sets, you don't need lots of walls and doors and props and everything else. They did it with a set of tables and chairs, which they just moved around the stage, and those tables and chairs became the inside of the social club, the inside of the aeroplane, various different locations, and the quality of the performances was so strong that you didn't need anything else getting in the way.
Yeah.
Those tables and chairs told you everything about where they were and the sort of the environment they were in, and I think that was fantastic. So I don't know if you found, from the minute it began, I was totally engaged in the storyline. I wanted to know what was happening to all of them.
Yeah.
And I had real empathy with every single character. So you're willing them to find out what happened to loved ones.